Hi, welcome to today's video. My name's Paul. Today I want to talk a little bit about watercolor paper and maybe what you should look out for when you're choosing which paper to use. And also in the background, rather than just a talking head type of video, this is some footage that I did a few days ago. It's just a simple little watercolor landscape. It's actually a part of Ireland called County Down, and they have the Mourne Mountains, and around the Mourne Mountains there's many small farms, and these farms, the little tiny fields, are separated by stone walls. The Mourne Mountains are granite mountains, and the stone walls, dry stone walls, are made with granite blocks. So rather than using a reference, again, it's just from memory, but that's the sort of image that I'm trying to capture here. Okay, as far as paper goes, I think there's a few things that you need to consider when choosing watercolor paper. So the first thing is what's it made of? And the best material for watercolor paper is cotton, 100% cotton. The reason is the cotton fibers are quite long compared to, say, wood pulp fibers, which means when you soak the paper there's less buckling. You can get some alternatives to cotton. The cotton paper is very expensive, so that's the main drawback with the cotton paper. You can get some cheaper alternatives. Probably the most common alternative is cellulose paper, so 100% cellulose. It will work, however it really depends on your style of painting. If you're doing glazing, so you put down a layer, as I did here, I put down the sky and left it to dry and then started painting over the top of that. Cellulose, you might get good results, but in my experience it really doesn't work very well with glazing or any type of layering of paint. There is another alternative which is a bit more exotic. It's a bamboo fiber paper. I haven't used it yet. I might try some in the future, so I can't really say if it's any good or not. But definitely 100% cotton is the sort of mainstream watercolor paper. So then the next thing you need to sort of consider is the weight of the paper, which is basically the thickness of the paper. And the minimum really for watercolor is about 300 grams per square meter, which is 140 pounds. Anything less than that, and again, you're going to have problems with buckling. You can sort of try and get around that a little bit by stretching the paper, and there are plenty of videos on YouTube showing you how to stretch paper. You'll need a wooden board, some sort of tape, and you need to soak the paper, put it onto the board, tape it all down, and then get a dry clean sponge and take off the excess water. I don't really do that because it's not the most exciting job in the world, and it does take quite a bit of time, and if you're going to be doing that for every single sketch or painting that you do, it is time consuming. Another thing that you need to consider, by the way, this is the final painting, or at least a scan of the final painting that I did. It's not I'm happy enough with the final result. I don't consider it one of my best paintings, but as a little sketch, it's okay. Yeah, you need to consider the surface of the paper as well. So there are different types of surface for watercolor painting. You can divide it into, say, hot pressed and cold pressed, sometimes called rough and smooth. So hot pressed paper is a very smooth paper. It's good for putting in details, but using, especially for sort of loose watercolor painting that I do, the sort of impressionist style painting, the smooth paper isn't the best. The rougher paper, the cold pressed paper, is much better. It has a lot more texture on the surface and you get more interesting results. Sort of a last thing to maybe consider, and it certainly has an effect on how good the paper is sizing. So watercolor paper, one of the things that distinguishes watercolor paper from, say, sketching paper is whether or not sizing has been added to the paper. And sizing is usually gelatine that is either coated onto the surface of the paper or it's incorporated into the paper during the process, the manufacturing process. Sizing will basically prevent, so usually if you put water or watery paint onto paper, it'll soak straight through. Sizing prevents that from happening. It slows down the process of the water seeping into the paper. So it's another reason why using just a sketchbook, even if it's quite a thick paper for sketchbook, it may not have any sizing, so it may not be the best for watercolor. So then sort of finally, in terms of particular brands, so the one that I'm going to recommend as number one is not surprising, and it's a French brand, Arches. That's probably the wrong pronunciation. I can read French, but in terms of the accent, I have never been able to master French pronunciation. The other one, and I'm also probably going to butcher the pronunciation here, but it's a German brand, Hahnemühle. Their paper is, in my opinion, it's not as good as Arches paper. However, it is also a bit cheaper. So for practicing and getting started, it's maybe a good alternative. I've also heard that in terms of more affordable papers, watercolor papers to get started with, Strathmore might be quite good. It's certainly not in the same league as Arches paper. So maybe to get started, you can buy from some art stores will sell individual sheets of watercolor paper. Maybe the best way to get started is to get 3 or 4 different brands, try them out, see which ones you like, or just go straight for Arches if that's what you prefer. Like I say, it is pricey, it's not cheap. Okay, so hopefully some interest or some use to somebody. If you'd like to subscribe, just click on the big red button below, and hopefully see you in the next video.